Senator from Oklahoma.
You know, I can somewhat associate with the remarks of the senator from Louisiana. We've unwound because we don't want to have real debates and real votes. We just fixed the flood insurance program. We didn't fix it well enough. And if Senator Landrieu is allowed her amendment, I'll vote against it. But I think she ought to be able to have her amendment. The whole fact is the reason the Senate isn't working is because we want to use a procedure that was never before been used, except in the last 2 or 3 years, in this body, and that is to limit a senator's right to offer an amendment. And the fact is Senator Landrieu may, in fact, win her amendment. But there's another chance. The House may not go along with it. There's going to be a conference committee, may not go win. She didn't win this when we fixed the flood insurance. You know, she wasn't for us raising it to the extent we did, and we didn't raise it near enough to make it healthy yet. And delaying it 3 years will markedly hurt the flood insurance program, which is operated through FEMA, which is I'm the ranking member on that subcommittee. But the fact is she ought to be allowed to have her amendment. I agree with that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and painfully, I'm going to talk about every amendment I have for the Farm Bill. And I understand there's going to be objections to it, and I'm a big boy, but if there's objections to mine, and even if Senator Landrieu's gets cleared, I'm going to object to everybody else's until mine are cleared. So we can either keep going around in this circle, or we can start acting like grown-ups and have debates, even though you don't like the amendment, vote on it. And if you're not capable of defending your vote up here on any issue, you don't have any business being here in the first place. But to not vote, to not allow the managers of the bill to operate the bill the way they want to operate it, and put it all on the table, and actually because the majority leader is going to file cloture, and so all these amendments are going to fall, which may be pleasing to the managers, I don't know, and only the germane amendments are going to be available, and then they're going to be under a time constraint. And so the American people are actually going to get cheated out of a full and rigorous debate on things that ought to be changed in this bill. So I'm going to act like the amendments are approved, even though they're not, and I'm going to debate the amendments, and I'm going to offer every one of them, and I'm going to let the senator from Louisiana object, and then she can explain to her constituents the dysfunction of the Senate. And it doesn't just happen on the Republican side. I'd remind my colleague from Louisiana, there's plenty of unilateral objections on the other side. And if we're going to operate this way, then nothing's going to happen in the Senate. And so with that, I will begin. I will be happy to yield for a question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate my friend, Mr. President. I just want, before you proceed with your unanimous consent request, just to ask the senator if he would agree that when we brought the Farm Bill to the floor the last time, that we had 73 votes, and we did, it was done in a large agreement, but we worked through every one of them, and I agree that my preference is to be able, as I know our distinguished ranking member is, to work through amendments and to have votes and so on. And would you agree that that process last time worked? And I know my friend didn't end up voting for the final bill, but we did work through a process of 73 votes. I think it was a really long day, or 2 days, I think, actually. And that would be the good way to proceed on this bill.
I agree.
And so Mr. President, I will certainly yield back to my friend, but just to indicate that's what we've been working on doing, and objections from various members for various reasons. But we have been spending our time hoping to come up with, even post-cloture, it would be our desire to come up with a finite list of amendments that we could then move forward and get agreement on to vote on, because I'm very happy to have votes on, additional votes on the bill.
Mr. President, I'd ask that the pending amendment be set aside and Coburn Amendment 1003 be called up.
Is there objection? Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I'm going to talk about this amendment. This is an amendment that prohibits, let me set the stage for it. We're going to have somewhere between a $500 and $700 billion deficit. We got $17.5 trillion worth of debt today. And what this amendment does is it prohibits people who are tax evaders from receiving government assistance, from including grants, contracts, loans, and tax credits provided in the Farm Bill, with the exception of SNAP. So we're still going to take care of food provision, even if they refuse to pay their taxes. We're still going to provide them food, but we're not going to allow, with this amendment, them to take advantage of other programs within the farm or any other area that's associated with direct grants associated with Ag Bill. The most critical issues facing our country today, and everybody knows how to solve it. We know what has to be done to save Medicare. We know what has to be done to save Social Security. We know we need to reform the tax code so that we generate more jobs, we generate more income to the federal government. We know all that. But we have billions of dollars that is owed. It's not under contestant. It's not being contested. That's owed. And then we turn around to those same people who owe us billions of dollars and give them programs and benefits, whether it be conservation payments or whether it be crop insurance or whatever it is. We turn around and give them money. And I think the average taxpaying American doesn't agree with that. That part of being a responsible citizen is paying the taxes you owe. So we're not talking about things that are in dispute. We're talking about settled agreements that aren't paid, and they continue to not be paid, and it's billions of dollars. This would not apply if the current individual is currently paying the taxes, interest, and penalties that are owed to the IRS, that the individual and the IRS have worked out a compromise on the amount of taxes, interest, and penalties, and is in the process of being repaid. The individual has not exhausted his or her right to due process under the law. The individual filed a joint return and successfully contends that he or she should not be fully liable for the taxes in a joint return, or because of something that the other party to the return did or did not do. Further, this provision would not apply to SNAP payments provided in the bill. Farm income is subject to very little scrutiny and reporting requirements. In fact, there was a 78% reporting gap in farm income reported to the IRS just last year. 78% gap. This is by far the largest gap in individual income reporting to the IRS. In a time of strict budgets, as many in Washington are calling on for increased revenue, it's inappropriate for us to continue to provide funding to individuals who owe back taxes and aren't in compliance with their obligations. Total taxes owed in the United States in 2006 were $2.66 trillion. The gross tax gap for that year, taxes owed but not collected, was $450 billion. The net tax gap in 2006, taxes still not paid after late payments enforced, is still $385 billion. Now, the president wants another $600 or $800 billion. What we have to do is start figuring out ways to collect the taxes that are owed us. According to Internal Revenue Service, the difference between the amount legally owed in taxes and the amount actually collected was this $385 billion. That's the most recent year IRS can give us, 5 years old data. $28 billion that was owed was because people failed to file. Underpayment was $46 billion, and intentional underreporting of income was $376 billion. So what this amendment does is it just puts a prohibition. It says you can't have this money if you owe X money and it's settled. It's not under dispute. So it's not about not giving people their rights. It's already been adjudicated. Now, why would we not want to do that with the Farm Bill? Can you think of a reason why we wouldn't want the people who owe taxes, who already have agreed that they owe the taxes, and we're going to give them money and they're not going to pay the taxes that they owe the federal government? It's a common sense amendment. We're not going to get a vote on that. And we're not going to get a vote on it because we have cowardly members of the Senate, and I'm not talking about the senator from Louisiana, who refuse to come down here and voice their objections to bills, and refuse to debate why they won't allow an amendment that does something for the future, that actually will make a difference in a kid's life in the future, that will actually increase some income so we can afford the flood insurance program that we have. they won't come in down and debate it and express an opinion why they won't allow a vote on it. It dishonors the Senate. Mr. President, I ask the pending amendment be set aside and amendment number 1004 be called up.
Mr. President, I'm going to have to object to that as well, but I know the senator is going to want to speak about it. Thank you.
This amendment ends conservation payments to millionaires, people who make $1 million a year. Now, we have a rule at the USDA that says people making $1 million a year aren't supposed to get these payments. But guess what the USDA does? They waive the payment. They waive the rule. And what this amendment would do is say you can't waive the rule. If you, again, talking about our debt, the very well-heeled, the very well-connected are getting the majority of the conservation payments in this country. They're the ones most capable of doing conservation on their own land and do. But now they do it with the assistance of mine or the President Pro Tem's grandchildren. Because what we're actually doing is paying them dollars that our grandkids are going to get to pay back. What we're doing with this program is incentivizing people to do what they're already going to do in their best interests. And all I'm saying is enforce the rule. The law today do not give the Department of Agriculture the ability to waive. If somebody's making $1 million a year, they don't need our help right now. Our kids need that help. Our grandkids need that help. Our schools need that help. They don't need that help.
For, actually, if I might, a question and a clarification, if I might,
Absolutely.
Mr. President. Thank you very much. I have good news for the senator. On page 309 of the bill, based on the fact that we took the amendments from last time, his language is in the bill. It was accepted last time. It was part of the 73 amendments that were offered. And as I had indicated earlier, we included everything that was in fact passed by the Senate on the floor last time so that people would know that their amendments were included in the bill. There was one exception to that, which was the Coburn-Durbin amendment, which in fact was re-voted on and is now a part of the bill. But on page 309, section 2610, adjusted gross income limitation for conservation programs. So the senator's correct. It was passed last time, and the good news is that it is in the bill.
Well, I thank the chairman of the committee.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I will double check that with my staff. This excludes something that was in the bill, so I'll have to look at what the old bill said to be able to concur with that. If that's the case, then there shouldn't be any problem with accepting this amendment, if in fact it's not complete. Because it's the intent of the authors, both the chairman and the ranking member, that this limitation be a part of this farm bill. So.
We certainly will work with you and look at the intent on that. It is the intent. And I would also just in passing indicate that that hopefully we will have an opportunity as we come to a universe of amendments as we did last year to have the senator's previous amendment that he talked about, which is also one that I support. So as we work through this again, what we need to do is what we did last time, is to come up with a universe, can be large, small, and put in the interest of time, make sure a variety of senators have the opportunity to offer different amendments as well, not just one or two senators, but that a number of senators have the opportunity to. And hopefully members will be willing to come together and put together a list that includes Senator Landrieu's flood insurance amendment, which is absolutely critical. We have other amendments. Senator Grassley has an amendment we've been working on to pair with Senator Landrieu that we'd like very much to put together. And I would be very interested in including Senator Coburn's 1003, which he talked about previously, because I think it makes sense. So right now we're at a point where we've just got to get people positively working together on a list that we can move through together. But the good news is, Senator Coburn, that the one that you are speaking about, I believe, is as you had offered it last time, but we'll be happy to work with you.
The committee. Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
I ask the pending amendment be set aside and Amendment 1005 be called up.
Is there objection?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, 3.5 years ago, with the debt limit increase, my colleagues and I overwhelmingly voted to ask the GAO to study duplicative programs in the federal government. And this last April, they gave the third and what will be a continuing rollout of the programs in the federal government. And I would just say that the director of the OMB followed other amendment that I offered, directing all the programs of the federal government be published. Now, they made their first stab at that this is last week, and Director Burwell, who I have utmost confidence in at OMB, a stellar individual, made the first attempt at that. The problem is what is a program in the federal government, because there's no definition. So we've got a rough start in an attempt to do that. But what the GAO has done, and their magnificent employees over the last 3.5 years, have identified at least $250 billion of waste and duplication that we ought to be getting rid of. And here's an amendment that's not highly prescriptive, but recognizes what GAO told us about food assistance programs, domestic food assistance programs. And we didn't make any attempt in this bill to streamline those or consolidate them or put metrics on them. And so what this amendment does is try to bring that together through the USDA to put, number one, metrics on them. Number two, combine the ones that are duplicative so that we can actually be effective in what we intend to be, but also be efficient. Those are two words that hardly ever happen in Washington. Efficiency and effectiveness. And so what this amendment does is GAO they found signs of overlap and inefficient use of the resources within the 18 different programs. Now, we have 18 different programs. 3 of them are outside of the Department of Agriculture. 1 of them is in Homeland Security. First of all, there shouldn't be a food assistance program outside of the Department of Homeland Security. 2 of them are at HHS. So we shouldn't have duplicative bureaucracies in those other 2 departments when we've got a bureaucracy in agriculture. But of those 18 programs, what they found was the following. 11 of the 18 programs, there was not enough research to even determine, in other words, the agency didn't have the research, whether or not the programs were effective. We don't know if what we're doing is working, because never when we pass these programs do we require a metric or some type of method to assess their effectiveness. And so that's one of the things this amendment will do, and allows the Department of Agriculture to do that. Matter of fact, it mandates that they'll do it. Is it effective? What parameters are you using to say that it's effective? In other words, if the American taxpayers are going to spend money on this program, ought they not know whether or not it works? I mean, only in Washington do we do programs and not know whether they work or not, and not ask whether or not they work. So 11 of the 18 programs, there's not enough knowledge even in the Department of Agriculture to know whether they're working. What this amendment does is it requires the Department of Agriculture to evaluate the following 10 programs: Child and Adult Care Food Program, the Community Food Projects Competitive Grant Program, the Emergency Food and Shelter National Board Program, the Grants to American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian Program, Organizations for Nutrition and Support Services Program, the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations Program, the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, the Senior Farmer Market Nutrition Program, the Summer Food Service Program, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and the WIC Farmers Nutritional Program. Now, let me just mention one of these. The Summer Food Service Program, it was announced by KOTV in Tulsa, Oklahoma, just last night. No matter who you are, they're going to feed you 2 meals a day in the summer. Whether you make $100,000 a year or whether you really are in need of a meal. So first of all, we got a problem with that program. We ought to be supplying food for people that need food, not for people that don't need food. And smart people are going to take advantage of that and say, man, I can get 2 meals a day and I'm not in need, but since it's free, I'm going to take it. And last summer, we served 180,000 meals in Tulsa. And a large proportion of those weren't of people of a need. So I have no objection to helping people who have need, but here's a program that has no limits on it and has no metrics on it. And it's a wide open program, well-intentioned, but there's not a metric and there's not a limitation. So all we're saying with this amendment is here's 10 programs, Department of Agriculture, determine whether or not they're effective. And by the way, how did you determine that? What were the parameters that you used to do that? That's just common sense. Why wouldn't we want to know if the programs are working? Why wouldn't we want to know if they're efficient and effective? Why shouldn't we look at it? When we're running, we're down to 24 cents of the dollar that we're just borrowing against our kids' future from 48. And that's because of the economy growing last year to the tune of $360 billion coming in and $620 billion over the next 10 years in tax increases on the very wealthy in this country. So we're down to 24 cents, but we're still borrowing 24 cents out of every dollar we spend. Why would we not want to spend the time to make sure these programs are effective and efficient? So it's very straightforward. This amendment also eliminates one program, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, and moves any incomplete or ongoing projects to the appropriate USDA program. USDA proposed eliminating this program themselves, which targets low-income pregnant women, children, and persons age 60 or, but Congress continued to fund the program. And that's the reason they wanted to get rid of it, because they already have programs that duplicate this one. And yet here we find it's going to get funded again, it's going to get authorized again, and even USDA says we don't need this program. So it's the only program that we have. And in 2012, the program was funded at $177 million, and it duplicates SNAP grants to Native American Home Delivered Nutrition Program for Senator. In other words, USDA already recognizes that it's a duplicative program. They've asked for it to be eliminated. We didn't eliminate it, and so this amendment would eliminate it. This amendment also eliminates the Seniors Farmers Market Nutrition Programs and moves the non-duplicative function to the WIC Farmers Market Nutrition Program. Both of these programs do exactly the same thing. They provide grants to participating states to offer vouchers and coupons and electronic benefit cards to low-income participants that may be used in farmers markets, roadside stands, and other approved venues to purchase fresh produce. They provide exactly the same assistance to women, children, and seniors and should be combined. GAO says they should be combined. USDA says they should be combined, but they're not combined in the bill. All the cost savings from the eliminations of these consolidations and 3 eliminations are directed towards providing food assistance. In other words, none of the money comes back out. It goes back in through programs that have proven to be effective. This amendment also directs the USDA to coordinate with Health and Human Services Administration on Aging to identify and address fragmentation, overlap, and duplication between the programs providing food services on Indian reservations where we have a real need. So we're not just looking for duplication, we're looking for gaps in service. And it also requires them to report their recommendations back to Congress. And since I don't want to use my big slides today, I'll use my small slide. Here's the food assistance programs, all 18 of them. 15 runs Department of Agriculture, 2 run through HHS, and 1 through Homeland Security. And yet GAO says you can collapse these 18 into 10 and be more effective, get better nutrition to the people at risk groups, and we've not done it. So it's like we did ask GAO to do all this work and then we didn't pay any attention to it. Mr. President, I would ask that the pending amendment be set aside and Amendment 1006 be called up.
Mr.
Is there
President,
objection?
I object. May I say something, though? Just a
Objection
minute?
is heard.
First of all, I thank
Senator yield.
Senator
I will yield for a question, but I will not give up my time.
Okay.
I will not yield the floor. I'll be happy to yield for a question.
Okay. I would ask the senator, does he know that some of us are very sympathetic with the amendments that he's offering? And does he know that some of us would really actually like to vote on some of those amendments, so that I'm sure he is aware? Is he aware that I'm really sorry that I have to object, but it's the only way I can get my amendment up?
I would just respond to the senator from Louisiana. I have no ill will towards her objections. I stated it plainly before. I believe the Senate ought to consider any and all prior to court cloture, any and all. I think senators have the right to offer anything that they think is pertinent to this country right now on any bill that's going through here. I've used that tactic for the first 3 years I was in the Senate. Nobody objected. And now that we've become so partisan and so cowardly that we are afraid to vote on issues, and that we abuse the rights in the Senate to the detriment of the whole body, I hold no ill will against you for you objecting. But the point is the country's the worse off for it. And I'm sure some of my colleagues don't want to have to vote on some of my amendments. I understand that. But there's amendments I don't like voting on either. But I don't have any problem going home and taking a stand. And the fact is that we can figure out what we're for and what we're against. And, the fact, when it goes through here, it doesn't mean it's law. What it means, it has to be conferenced with the House. And we ought to let it roll. We ought to open the spigot up and let things roll in the Senate, have the votes. We used to have 10 and 12 votes at a time. We used to do bills, you'd come down all morning long, you'd be offering amendments. We'd have committee hearings and stuff in the afternoon. At 4 o'clock, we'd come down and vote 9, 10, 8 amendments. And the next day, we'd do the same thing. And the next day, we'd do the same thing. So the fact is if you really want to get our country back, if you really want the confidence of the American people to return to those that represent them in Washington, we got to start saying, can't win everything, going to try. If I lose, but I tried hard. And that's how we ought to play the game. The fact that we have people abusing the process on both sides, not just one side. I'll never forget the former Senator Akaka, one of the most loveliest men I've ever met in my life. When I first came to the Senate and offered an amendment that wasn't germane, he objected to it. And one of my colleagues stood up and said, Senator Akaka, do you really mean that? Because we don't really, you have to understand where that starts. If you object to his amendment, that means in the future I'm going to be objecting to your amendment. And that we've not ever done that. And that what we actually want is a freewheeling, open amendment process so people can be heard. The fact is I represent 4 million people. The senators from California represent 37 million. Everybody's voice ought to be heard. We each ought to be able to have our voice. We each ought to be able to offer amendments. We ought to be able to get votes on those amendments. What are we afraid of? Is the next election really that important that we don't want to allow people to offer their ideas in what used to be the greatest deliberative body? It certainly isn't now. It's not anywhere close. Do we really not want ideas to be of profit and debated and the American people to understand what's at stake? I mean, what I've offered today, maybe not everybody would agree with it, but you can't disagree that it doesn't make sense, that it's not common sense, that we shouldn't be more efficient, more effective, that we should worry about the future as we worry about the present, that we ought not to be spending 24 cents out of every dollar by borrowing it from other people in the world, or having Ben Bernanke print it at the Federal Reserve. We can solve these problems. The grown-ups need to stand up and say, we're going to have debate. We're going to have amendments. We're going to do, even if we don't like them. So I have no ill will towards the senator from Louisiana. I have ill will for the process that has devolved. And I think it's a shame that the American people are being shortchanged by the lack of debate, the lack of votes. This amendment, even though objected to, is, I think, another critical area where we haven't got our eye on the ball properly. And this is an amendment that relates to the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. And what it does, in this bill, it's been increased, the amount of money has been increased to $70 million a year. And it was at $55 million in 2012. And there's nothing wrong with having this block grant program, but I want to show you how we can save $75 million over the next 5 years. And $75 million isn't chump change. It's $75 million. The amendment freezes spending for the specialty crop block grant at $55 million authorized by the bill. And what the amendment does, it prioritizes food safety and access to affordable foods for school children and low-income families. 1/3 of the projects funded by the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program last year were for marketing and promotion. They weren't for kids. They weren't for seniors. They were spending money to promote. Now, let me show you who got the money. Let's see, we spent money to promote the emotional benefits of real flowers and plants in the home. That's got to be a priority right now, isn't it? We're going to borrow $500 billion this year, and we're going to spend money to make sure everybody in America knows what the emotional value of having real flowers and plants in the home is. That's a priority right now. How about grant funds for a float that travels to fairs and festivals to encourage people to eat more fruits and vegetables? That's got to be a priority. We're going to pay for a float that goes around to all the fairs so that we can promote eating. People know they need to eat more. Could we spend that dollar in a better way and get a better effect? How about wine receptions and tasting receptions? By the way, the market access program already covers it, but we take money from this block grant program and promote wines in China and Taiwan. We do it also with the market access program. Here's an absolute direct duplication, and we're spending millions of dollars promoting something that we have another program that's designed to promote it for. We didn't do anything about that. How about a short video showcasing pear growers and promote state wines in Mexico and India? Again, duplication of what the market access program does, but we take a specialty crop block grant program. We got one program for market access and promotion, and then we take that a different program and use it for exactly the same thing. Specifically, the amendment would require that no less than 80% of the total funding appropriated for the specialty crop block grant program be spent on the following: increase access, availability, and affordability of specialty crops for children, youth, families, and others at risk, including but not limited to specialty crops for meals served in schools and food banks; ensuring food safety, protecting crops from plant pests and disease, and production of specialty crops. That's what it was originally set up for, by the way. It wasn't set up to promote wines in India or China or Taiwan or Brazil or Mexico. So part of it is the way we wrote the bill that allows USDA to give grants that go outside of the original purposes of it. Funds could still be spent on marketing and promotion, but not at the expense of crops and consumers. Mr. President, I ask the pending amendment be set aside and Coburn Amendment 1007 be called up.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. Could I ask the good senator from Oklahoma, since he's talked about 3 amendments, could I just ask unanimous consent for my amendment to see if anybody would object to it? Would you?
I'd be happy to yield a limited time for you to
Just,
ask that unanimous consent.
Without objection?
Thank you. I'll try to do this in less than 3 minutes. I ask unanimous consent the pending amendment be set aside and the following amendments be made pending in block: Landrieu 1113, Johnson 1117, Cardin 1159, and Grassley 1097, that the time until 5 p.m. today be equally divided and controlled in the usual form, and that at 5 o'clock the Senate proceed to a vote on the amendments in order listed. There be 2 amendments of debate prior to each vote, no second-degree amendments to be in order to any of the amendments prior to the votes, and that amendments be subject to a 60 affirmative vote threshold. I'd also like to add that I would not object personally to having one of Senator Colburn's amendments, since he's been on the floor, added to this list. But this was the list that I was given to ask, just 4 amendments. 2 of them are on flood insurance, and the Grassley amendment is on. It's a freedom of information. The Grassley amendment is freedom of information regarding EPA. And so we would have votes. All of them would require 60 votes. Both sides have a side-by-side, which we sometimes do in this body, so that if people want to vote no, they can have something to vote yes for. This is the most reasonable way that I could present this list to try to help us get a vote on flood insurance and another important amendment to Senator Grassley, a Republican. I'm a Democrat. Senator Grassley is a Republican, so it's very balanced on each side. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to try to get a vote this afternoon.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Pennsylvania?
reserving the right to object. The senator from Louisiana is proposing an amendment that I strongly disagree with the substance on. Despite that, I don't object to her having a vote on her amendment. What I object to is the fact that there are only 4 senators who get to have amendments here. We have a list here of maybe a dozen, maybe it's 15 amendments that senators from our side have been requesting to have considered, and they've been objected to all week long. And now we're told that soon we can expect the majority leader to file a cloture motion on the bill, which will lead to shutting off this bill entirely. This seems to me a clear strategy to block amendments. Now, so far, we've had 10 roll call amendments on this bill. Of those, 3 have been Republicans. And last year, the Farm Bill had 42 roll call votes. So what I would like to do is we could work this out right now, as far as I'm concerned. If these amendments could be made in order, maybe there are others on your side, I would welcome them. I have no objection to the senator from Louisiana having a vote on her amendment. But I just don't think that we ought to be doing just these 4, or some subset thereof, and continuing to shut out all the other senators who've been trying to get their amendments agreed to. So for that reason, I object.
Can I respond?
Objection is heard.
I'm going to respond just to the senator.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you. To the senator from Pennsylvania, and then we'll relinquish the floor to both leaders of the bill, because it's their responsibility, and I think they've been doing a great job trying to help us get through the Farm Bill. But I want to thank the senator from Pennsylvania, because this is real progress. He said he's not going to object to a vote on our flood insurance amendment. I really appreciate that, because I know that he has strong objections to it. I may not win the vote, but the people in my state have asked me to do everything I can to fight for them. This is a really serious issue in the state of Louisiana, and in Texas, and in Florida, and in Rhode Island, and in Maine, and in Massachusetts, and in Vermont, and even in Pennsylvania. So I thank the senator, and let me just yield the floor back to the chairman, or to the chairman of the committee, to see what could potentially be worked out. But I'm so happy that the senator is not going to object to a flood insurance amendment if we can ever get to one.
The senator from Oklahoma has the floor.
Mr. President,
Does the senator from Oklahoma yield?
if I might just.
I will yield to the chairman of the committee.
Thank you.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Arch. And I realize that the senator for Oklahoma does have the floor and does wish to continue with his amendments. I just want to speak to all the members that are on the floor, as well as those in their offices, because as everyone knows, again, to harken back to the last time around that we did this, and we had 73 amendments. Not all of them took a record roll call vote. But we came up with a finite list. It was 73. It was a big list, but we came up with a list. That's what we're trying to do now. We've been working with colleagues. We want that list. No one wants that more than I do, and Senator Cochran, to come up with a group of amendments so everyone knows what we'll be voting on and that we can begin to move through that. I indicated that we had included the amendments we voted on the floor last time. I did make one error my staff reminded me of. There is one that we did vote on that is not in here, which was Senator McCain's amendment on catfish. That was not included in deference to those who had objected. So, but everything else that was of substance, as I understand, is in the underlying bill. I do want to make a note that the distinguished senator from Oklahoma did have a significant amendment that came very early in this process, and in fact, it was one that I did not support. He won his amendment. We could have blocked it. I could have objected because I don't support the policy, but did not do that. And the senator's amendment did pass, even though I voted no and do not support what it. So from my perspective as the chair of the committee, I'm happy to have debate. I'm happier when I win than when I lose, but I'm happy to have debate. We want to put together a universe of amendments. Right now, we don't at this point have time to go through 150 amendments. So what we've got to do is find out what's a priority for everyone, put together a finite list. We're going to continue to work on that. If the majority leader files cloture, we can still continue to do that. We can put together a finite list, initiate the cloture vote, and move to a vote on a group of amendments. That would be my preference. I know it would be Senator Cochran's preference as well. And so we're going to continue to work on that, whether cloture is filed or not, see if we can't come together with a group of amendments, and hopefully we'll be able to get that done. That's my preference on how to do a bill. We're going to continue to try to do that to make that happen. So I appreciate the time with the Senator from Oklahoma yielding, and we'll continue to work with him as well as all members to move through to a place where we can have an opportunity for amendments to be offered in a timely manner and be able to get the bill done.
Mr. President.
Is there objection to the request from the senator from Oklahoma
On behalf,
to set aside the pending amendment?
on behalf of Senator Landrieu, I would object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I think I'm starting to hear the Senate starting to work the way it should. And so I'm going to wait till the chairman of the committee is finished with their conversation. I'm going to offer a unanimous consent request that the list that she presently has with the ranking member, senator from Mississippi, of a large number of amendments be considered as read and in order. That list that you proffered that went through both cloakrooms this afternoon, I'd ask unanimous consent that be agreed to and that those be filed and be considered.
Mr. President, reserving the right.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President. That is unfortunately an unrealistic motion from my perspective. We have got to work with members. Many members, including the senator who's speaking, have multiple amendments. And we need to get a list of priorities from people so that we have a smaller list that we can work with to be able to get this done in a timely manner. And so I would object at this point. I would like very much to see us put together a list, but to do this in a way where some members have many, many, many amendments and others.
Since an objection has been heard.
Yes.
It was my understanding you had an agreed upon list that you'd sent to both cloakrooms. Failing that, what I would propose, based on what I've heard out here this afternoon, is that you put that together and let's try it. And let's ask unanimous consent. The fact is that the chairman and ranking member of this committee have worked hard to get this bill. We can move this bill. But one thing you said in your statement is a finite list. That's fine. What we want to do is have an open amendment process. And so as you consider that, let's move it. And here's what will happen. Here's what used to happen in the Senate for my colleagues that are newly here. People would file all sorts of amendments, including me. And about half of them you wouldn't bring up. So we don't know in this universe of 150 how many are really serious, how many are done to file an amendment and to make a statement like I did on one amendment, changing the name of SNAP. I have no intention of calling that up, but to making a statement about what if it's really nutrition, supplemental nutrition access program. But what I would suggest to the chairman and ranking member is put that out there, give it to me. Let me offer a unanimous consent here on the floor live. We've had a great debate. We understand what the problems are. Let's have the vote. Let's start voting. Let's start debating and voting. When we consider all the time huddled in a group of staffers, we don't do anything. We don't debate the bill. We don't vote the bill. And so consequently, the American people get shortchanged. So what my offer, you give that offer, I'll offer that amendment. I won't even participate on what's in the mix. I believe the process ought to move forward, whether I win or not. And the fact is selfishness on the part of our colleagues, because they don't want to vote on something, keeps us from doing the country's work. And I think we're a seminal moment right now in the Senate where we can change what's happening in this body, if in fact we will lead to do that. I know that President Pro Tem wants to see that happen. I believe my colleague from Michigan wants to see that happen. I know the ranking member has had that philosophy for years in the Senate. He taught me it. I learned it from him. And I offered a lot of amendments that he opposed and didn't like, some of them affecting Mississippi. And he beat me every time. But he never said you can't offer the amendment. So I think we're at a seminal moment. Let's start moving things. And what I would do is call on the ranking member and the chairman, give me that list. Let me go fight for it. Let's break this beaver dam in the Senate. And let's start acting like grown-ups again.
Would the senator be willing to yield?
I'll be happy to yield for a question.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you very much. Well, let me first say that if I'm hearing you right, you will work with us to move forward on a unanimous consent request on a list of amendments. Certainly would welcome your doing that. I also do need to indicate that we have spent last week and this week moving amendments. We started moving amendments. Yours was one of the very first ones that we did vote on. We have been working together today, trying to move in small groups of amendments to be able to get things moving, now facing objections as we do that. But we did have the opportunity to do a number of amendments last week and have moved forward to vote and so on. We will continue to do that with colleagues. That is our intent. Again, and if my friend will remember, I mean, this is second time around for us. We've already done this once. We're back doing it again. We want to get it done. We want to have the opportunity for people to offer more.
Question in there somewhere, and I'd like to reclaim my time.
There is a question, if I might say to my friend, that I'm hearing you that you are desiring to work with us. Is that correct?
That is correct. Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
I have another unanimous consent request. And I want to preface this unanimous consent request. There's 150 amendments, I think the chairman said, or thereabouts, filed on this bill. A lot of those aren't going to require votes. Some are. I ask unanimous consent that every amendment that's been filed to this point be considered as read and considered debatable and votable.
Is there objection?
Yes, there is objection, Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
There's objections heard, Mr. President. If an objection
Senator from Oklahoma.
I retain my time.
Objection is heard. I appreciate the
Senator from Oklahoma has the floor.
Yes.
So let me make this point. If you wouldn't have objected, we could start voting tonight. We could vote tomorrow. We can get through those. Half of those will be pulled. And you'll be almost to the same number of votes that you would have had, that you did have the last time the bill came to the floor. So do we really want to break this logjam? Let me offer it again. We can move this thing. Let's just do it. Let's go out and vote. Let's take the tough votes. Some of us are going to get bruised. Big deal. We're all big grown-ups. Let's have the votes. Let's move amendments. Let's debate in the United States. Let's do the country's business. Instead, we're not going to do it. There's a compromise. More than half of those will be withdrawn. My colleagues know that. Let's put them all in order. Let's vote them. Let's take care of it, and let's be grown up and get the Senate back to where it's supposed to be. I'm going to offer my unanimous consent one more time. Every amendment that's been filed to date, as of now, be considered as read and pending.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. Let me just indicate.
Objection is heard.
Reserving
I'm sorry.
the right
I'm
to
sorry.
object,
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
President. Let me just indicate, as the manager of this bill, I appreciate the advice that we are receiving from the senator from Oklahoma, and we will certainly look forward to working with him on this and receive his advice. We are managing the bill on the floor. We appreciate very much the efforts of the senator to come down and move things in the direction he would like to do. We will continue to manage this bill in a way that is fair and open and work with all of our colleagues and look forward to getting this done. And I would just also, in reserving the right to object, indicate that we have a bill in front of us that affects 16 million people and their jobs. We have a bill that is $24 billion in deficit reduction, unlike any other thing that's come before us in bipartisan deficit reduction. We have a bill in front of us that has eliminated 100 different authorizations or programs because of duplication, which I know is near and dear to the senator's heart from Oklahoma. We have a bill worthy right now of voting on and passing. We will continue to work with all of our colleagues to move this forward, to get this done on behalf of the 16 million men and women who work in agriculture. We will take certainly his ideas under consideration as we move forward to manage this bill. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, fair and balanced consideration of your colleagues is allowing them to have amendments. And you just objected to that. So that's where we are. And that doesn't keep you from managing a bill. You still get to set the priorities of what comes up when. But here lies the problem in the U.S. Senate. There obviously is some amendments in there that they don't want to vote on. Otherwise, would not have heard an objection. So it's not just Senator Toomey, who has now said he would not object to Senator Landrieu's amendment. It's other objections of people who won't come down here to the floor and show their constituency what they're objecting to. In other words, it's darkness. It's not light. It's not transparency. It's not of good character. It's not of good moral fiber. What it is, it's the least of these, the lowest of these, that refuse to participate in an open and honest debate about what's going to happen in our country. I call on all my colleagues, Republican and Democrat alike. We know what has to happen to open up the Senate. Let's vote. Let's vote. For my colleagues on the Republican side objecting, I disagree. Let them vote. For my colleagues on the Democrat side, let us vote. Let the chips fall. The American people decided who'd come up here. Gaming this system by hiding behind an anonymous objection, putting it through the chairman. I'm proud to see the senator from Louisiana. She came out here and she showed courage. Said, here's why I'm doing it. She spoke honestly to her constituents back home and also to the members of this body. We don't have enough of that. So we had an opportunity just then to move this bill, restore the Senate back to the way it should function, and we chose not to do it. The American people got to be shaking their head right now in disgust. In disgust. Because had the time been spent, instead of figuring out what's okay and what's not okay, actually debating and voting amendments, we could have voted 30 or 40 amendments by now on this bill. But we chose not to do it. Some of us chose not to do it. You know, kindergarten's out around most of the rest of the country, except in the U.S. Senate. And it's still in session here. And we ought to be disgusted with ourselves, and the American people ought to be disgusted with us as well, because we're not allowing this body to do what our founders intended to do. And I'm going to spend a minute talking about that. This place is very different than the House. And no matter who's in charge, the tendency is to overuse the power of the majority. But what our founders intended was the Senate to be totally different than the House. The reason 6-year terms were put there is so that you wouldn't be susceptible to the political influence of re-election, so that you would become a long-term thinker, and that your motivation would be primarily a motivation for the best will of this country, not your state or your political career. The assessment of the Senate today is we've lost our focus. It's about politics, not our country. It's about the short term, not the long term. It's about anything but the best interests of the country. So here we have common sense amendments. I appreciate the fact that the chairman and ranking member have included some of mine in what they were proffering. But the fact, let's include them all. What is so bad about voting on a stupid amendment? If it's really stupid, they're either going to withdraw it or lose big. If it's really controversial, the American people want to see us debate and vote on controversial topics. They do not want to see us duck our responsibility. We've met the enemy. The enemy's us. We refuse to do it. Since I've had an objection to that Amendment 107, I'm going to ask unanimous consent that Amendment number 1008 be called up.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, on behalf of Senator Landrieu, I would object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, this amendment, even though it's been objected to, I'm going to talk about, is to require the Rural Utility Service of the Department of Agriculture to ensure that the grants and loans that it makes to provide access to broadband telecommunication services in rural areas are made to rural areas that don't already have access to broadband. Wait a minute. Why would we want an amendment to do that? This is an amendment to tell them to do what they're supposed to be doing. Over the years, the rural broadband program has seen a large amount of federal funding. In 2009, the Department of Agriculture broadband program received $2.5 billion from this stimulus bill. The Inspector General examined the Rural Utility Services Broadband Loan and Guarantee Program, and what he found that a large majority of the funds went to areas that already had broadband services. In other words, they didn't spend the money where we don't have broadband, they spent the money where we already do. Specifically, the Inspector General found that 148 communities that received broadband service funded by this program were within 30 miles of cities with more than 200,000 people, including the cities of Chicago and Las Vegas. Some of the federal funds going to broadband programs originate from the Department of Commerce as well. So we have the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Commerce both doing the same thing. The issue is highlighted by the problems with the broadband program that occurred in West Virginia, President Pro Tem state. Specifically, the state could not handle nor had the use of the routers that were delivered to them. Put simply, the libraries and schools didn't have the need for the powerful stuff that was sent to them. So we wasted the money. It was a $24 million error. You get to $1 billion at a time, and you get to $1 trillion, $1 billion at a time. What this amendment does is make them spend the money where we don't have broadband, not where we do. In other words, it prioritizes, which most of us would agree to, that broadband funds through this grant program go to areas that don't have broadband, rather than areas that already do. So let's wire the whole country first before we upgrade everybody else. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that amendment the pending amendment be set aside and Amendment 1010 be brought up.
Is there objection?
There is objection, Mr.
There's objection.
President. On behalf of Senator Landrieu, I object.
Objection's heard.
This amendment is probably, it's very controversial, I know, among my colleagues. But, you know, I've practiced medicine for 25 years. And before that, I ran a pretty successful business. And the Department of Health and Human Services delayed the implementation of ICD-10. Now, let me explain to you what that is. ICD-10 is the new diagnostic code book. And why is that important? Well, we use ICD-9 now, which helps us write the diagnosis codes, whether you're in a hospital, a clinic, a doctor's office, an outpatient surgery center, a home health, whatever it is, those diagnostic codes categorize what we actually did for you. And well-intentioned public health experts thought that we aren't broad enough in what we do with the ICD-9, International Classification of Diseases. So as a part of the Affordable Care Act, ICD-10 was implemented. And there's nothing wrong with updating it, but let me explain to you what we did. We went from 18,000 codes of diseases to 140,000 codes, the cost of which, at a minimum, in the healthcare system, under various studies, will be at least $5 billion a year added cost. Now, will there be some benefit? Yes, to public health experts that study disease patterns, there will be some limited benefit. The question we have to ask is, what's our biggest problem with healthcare? Our biggest problem with healthcare is it costs too much. It costs too much. And what we've done with ICD-10 is just the implementation, I'm talking $5 billion a year from now on. The implementation is going to cost $10 to $15 billion to put it in. And what this amendment would do would make a significant delay in the implementation of ICD-10. The implementation of the Affordable Care Act is going to cost enough as it is. And what this would do would put us refocusing on what is important. It's important that providers spend time with patients, not spend time trying to figure out how they fill out a disease code. And for any of you that doubt that there's a significance of this, if you have 18,000 codes now, most doctors write the disease diagnosis. They don't have a staff that does that. Now, when you go from 18,000 to 140,000, what's your doctor going to be doing? They're not going to be taking care of you. They're going to be spending time looking at a book that has 140,000 diagnostic codes and listing that. So we're going to take time away from patient care. And why is it important that the doctor gets it right? Because the penalties under Medicare for mislabeling are severe, and the sanctions are severe. Penalties of 1% to 2% payment per year on your total billing to Medicare or Medicaid. So the costs associated with ICD-10 are enormous. So it's not only hard and costly to implement it, but it takes people away. The very doctors we want spending time with patients, it limits that because they're going to be spending more time filling out paperwork for the federal government. The other thing it will do is it will not improve at all. It does nothing to improve healthcare outcomes. It won't improve the first patient. So there's no positive benefit in the short run or medium term to the patient. And the only limited benefit would be to long-term studies of public health officials. Now, let me give you some diagnostic codes for you to think about on how foolish this is. Here, one study, let me find them. The new codes account for injury sites ranging from opera houses to chicken coops to squash courts. So not only do you have to list what an injury was, you then have to go through this book and find out where it was. Was it on a ranch? Was it in the corral? Was it in the chicken coop? Because if you mislabel it, under threat of penalty from CMS. How about 9 different codes to where you got hurt around a mobile home? How about a burn due to water skis? How about walking into a lamppost? If you hit your head, it's important for public health officials to know that you walked into a lamppost. It includes 300 different codes related to every different animal. So if you got a bite from a rat or a chipmunk or a squirrel, there's 312 different codes around each one of those animals. It's got 72 codes pertaining to birds. You got pooped on, you got pecked at, you got bit. 72 separate codes. How about bitten by a turtle, or the second one, struck by a turtle, or walked on a turtle, or kicked a turtle? It's how much foolishness is in ICD-10. And we're going to ask our doctors to spend time figuring out 160,000 different codes on disease-related, when 18,000 does us just fine right now. So that what this would do would forego the implementation of ICD-10. Mr. President, I ask that the President Amendment be set aside and Amendment 1076 be called up.
Is there objection?
On behalf of Senator Landrieu, I would object.
Objection is heard.
I understand the objection. I have no ill will towards my chairman or ranking member for their objection. What this amendment does is, during sequester, it prohibits performance awards in the senior executive service. We're paying performance bonuses right now during sequester. The Office of Managed Budget has ordered a freeze on most bonuses for federal workers during sequestration. But the current law provides an exemption for members of the senior executive service, who are among the most highly paid federal government employees. What this amendment does is it closes that exemption loophole. If we're all going to suffer, everybody's going to suffer. And just because you work in the senior executive service doesn't mean you shouldn't have to participate and lead on the sacrifice that this country is going to have to be making and is making. So what this does is it treats SES, or Senior Executive Service personnel, just like every other federal employee. Mr. President, I ask the pending amendment be set aside. Actually, I think I'll stop with that. I have one other that Mr. President, I ask that Amendment 1152 be called up.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, I will object, Mr. President, but I would like to ask my friend, given all of the amendments, that if we were able to accept all of his amendments, would he be supporting the bill?
I haven't made that decision yet.
I would object on behalf of Senator Landrieu.
Objection is heard.
Look, I'll tell you how I go through looking at a farm bill. I believe farmers ought to farm. I don't believe they ought to farm the government. And I think you all, over the last few years, have done a good job changing that scenario. I believe food security is an important part of what America can do for both our country and our world. I also know that our farmers are some of our hardest working people. Having said all that, There's a ton of programs in here that don't directly benefit food security in this country or the American public. And when we still have the well-heeled and well-connected in this country taking advantage of farm programs, from pro athletes to everything else, who use the farm program as a method, as a tax hedge, and use the supplemental systems. By eliminating direct payments, you've done a great deal. I'm all for crop insurance. I think it ought to be a little more costly and a little more spread out. I think crop insurance, in terms of the commissions paid to the people that sell it, are a little too rich. I think there are a lot of other people who would like to have that book of business for a whole lot less money. We haven't done that. So it'll be a balance for me as I look at the improvements. I would congratulate you and the ranking member of making progress in the Farm Bill. I think we got a long ways to go. This amendment relates to one of those, which is how do we make sure that if we're going to take taxpayer money and help people with their needs under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, how do we make sure we're doing it in a way that actually gives them nutritious food? As a physician that's cared for obesity and heart disease and cancer and high blood pressure for years, diet has a big fact on that. And Senator Harkin and I have an amendment together, this amendment, which would create a pilot project in 2 states to allow states to use a nutritional assessment for setting eligibility for what can be bought with SNAP. That's what this amendment does. A lot of the companies don't like it. A lot of people say, well, how can you do that? But I would remind our colleagues, for many of the people who don't buy nutritious food, when we're helping them, we're actually paying for it twice. Because when they make really poor choices with our money to buy their food, they're creating disease categories that we're going to pay for in the future with our money for their disease. So the idea of trying a pilot project in 2 states where they use nutritional value to make a determination of what food products are eligible and what are not for the SNAP program is a time that most people out in the country would like to see. You know, you can't help. Most Americans want to help anybody that needs help, but I hear it all the time when people say, I see people buying stuff I don't buy or I can't afford to buy with their SNAP card. So there's no good way to do that other than do it on a nutrition basis, and that's the only way we should look at that. If we're going to help somebody, we ought to help them. There's a great book by a guy by the name of Marvin Lasky. If you ever have a chance to read a great book, it's 15, 20 years old now. It's called The Tragedy of American Compassion. And he talks about how you help people. And you don't help people by giving them a blank check. You help people in short term. You help them as long as they have a need, but you help them in a way that they get to help themselves and get their dignity back. And what Senator Harkin and I agreed to on this is this pilot project will have to be evaluated at the end of 2 years. All the costs of it have to be borne by the states. We've checked out all the computer companies. There's no problem with putting limitations as terms of UPC codes or anything else and all the checkout stuff. It's not an issue. We've done all the homework on it. But it would be interesting to see, once you do a nutritional evaluation and a limitation on SNAP products, what would happen to the health of the people that we're helping. And so that's the amendment that he and I have worked together. We would love to see it go. We think it's time for that to happen, and it certainly will be good. The key is can we help people get back to being self-reliant? I don't want us to be a big brother, but I also want to make sure that the money that we're stealing from our kids, their future, actually really does help somebody and doesn't hurt them. With that, I would again congratulate both the chairman and ranking member for the bill that they brought. It has marked improvements. I would thank them for their patience in dealing with me today on the floor. I would say I very much regret that you have objected to a way to move this bill forward because it doesn't just have implications for this bill. The courage to stand up and say, let's do that, will have great implications for how this body functions for the next 16 months. And I think we're going to miss a big opportunity if we don't do that. I'd love to see the Senate go back to operating the way it did when I first came here. My hopes are dashed, however, with that objection. Mr. President, I yield the floor.